Aisha, a young Indian bride, thought she had found her dream life when she married Sheikh Khalid of Dubai. But when her own mother, Mira, entered their home, the fairy tale quickly twisted into a nightmare. What began as love and luxury spiraled into betrayal, obsession, and a shocking crime that would leave the world stunned. Aisha had always dreamed of escaping her small-town life in India, and when her family arranged her marriage to Sheikh Khalid of Dubai, she felt as if destiny had opened its doors. Khalid was wealthy, powerful, and admired by many. The wedding was nothing less than a spectacle. Guests traveled from faraway places, the venue sparkled with golden lights, and Aisha wore a bridal dress that seemed to belong to royalty. Cameras flashed, music filled the air, and she believed her life was about to turn into the kind of fairy tale that others only watched in films. Her relatives were proud, whispering that she was the luckiest girl in the family. When she first arrived in Dubai, the scale of Khalid's world overwhelmed her. The villa stretched wide with marble floors, chandeliers, and glass walls that overlooked manicured gardens. Dozens of staff moved silently through the halls, catering to every need. Luxury cars lined the driveway, and the scent of expensive perfumes filled every room. Aisha thought she had stepped into another universe, far away from the narrow lanes and modest houses of her childhood. At night, when she sat beside Khalid in his grand dining hall, she felt a rush of gratitude. He showered her with gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, and promises of endless happiness. He spoke to her with charm, painting pictures of a life that seemed perfect. But even in those early days, small cracks appeared. Khalid's smile sometimes faded quickly when no one was watching. His eyes often drifted away, as though carrying secrets she could not touch. Aisha ignored the unease. She told herself it was only adjustment, that every marriage had its silence. For now, she was a bride in a golden cage, convinced that love and loyalty would guard her new life forever. At first, Aisha believed the distance between her and Khalid was temporary. The early weeks of marriage had been filled with attention, but as months passed, his warmth began to fade. Khalid would often return home late, his phone glued to his hand, his explanations vague. Business meetings, long drives, urgent calls. Reasons that left Aisha with more questions than answers. Nights that once echoed with conversation and laughter grew quiet, with Khalid either locked away in his office or stepping out without notice. Aisha felt herself slipping into the background of his life. She tried to fill the silence with hope. She decorated the villa with personal touches, cooked meals she thought he would love, and waited patiently at the grand dining table. But too often, she dined alone, her plate untouched as the sound of the ticking clock filled the emptiness around her. The more she tried to bridge the gap, the further he seemed to drift. Even when he was physically present, his mind felt distant, his eyes refusing to meet hers. The staff, though loyal to Khalid, noticed the shift as well. They exchanged uneasy glances when Aisha asked about his whereabouts. No one dared to speak openly, but their silence told her what words did not. She found herself pacing the villa's endless halls at night, the loneliness pressing down heavier with each passing day. Still, she convinced herself it was just the burden of Khalid's responsibilities. After all, men of power often carried stress, and perhaps he simply needed space. Aisha held onto that belief tightly, ignoring the growing knot in her chest. She could not yet imagine that this distance was not born of business, but of secrets that would soon shatter her world. Months into the cold silence of her marriage, Aisha received news that her mother, Mira, would be visiting. The idea filled her with relief. She longed for someone familiar, someone who carried pieces of home in her presence. When Mira arrived at the villa, her warmth and chatter immediately changed the atmosphere. Aisha felt less alone, finally having a companion to share her days with. Khalid welcomed Mira with surprising enthusiasm. He arranged a suite for her, filled it with flowers, and even presented her with a silk shawl as a gesture of respect. Aisha, touched by his thoughtfulness, believed her husband was finally showing care for her, by honoring her family. The first days of Mira's stay were filled with laughter and comfort. Mother and daughter spent hours walking through the gardens, reminiscing about old memories from India and sharing meals together at the long dining table. Khalid often joined them, and for the first time in months, Aisha felt the house alive again. She even began to think that her mother's presence was healing the gaps in her marriage. But slowly, subtle details unsettled her. Khalid seemed unusually attentive to Mira. He asked about her health, her interests, and her life in India with an eagerness Aisha hadn't seen directed toward herself in a long time. Small gestures caught her eye, an extra smile, a lingering look, or a compliment that sounded slightly more personal than necessary. At first, Aisha brushed it off, telling herself she was being paranoid. After all, Khalid was simply being polite, wasn't he? Yet, beneath her relief, something felt strange. Instead of easing her loneliness, Mira's presence seemed to pull Khalid further away. A shadow she could not yet name was beginning to stretch across the walls of her perfect villa. As the days went by, Aisha's unease grew sharper. She began to notice small things that didn't fit together. Jewelry she hadn't seen before appeared among her mother's belongings. Delicate gold bangles and a necklace far too costly for a casual gift. Mira claimed they were old pieces she had brought from India, but Aisha knew every ornament her mother owned, and these had never existed. There were whispers, too, quiet voices drifting through the marble corridors late at night. Once, as she walked to the kitchen for water, she heard muffled laughter behind a closed door, laughter that ended abruptly the moment her footsteps echoed in the hall. The villa, once a palace of comfort, began to feel like a labyrinth of secrets. Khalid's behavior toward Aisha only deepened her suspicion. He avoided her questions, kept his phone out of sight, and left the dining table whenever her mother entered the room, as though drawn to her presence. What unsettled Aisha most was the change in Mira herself. Her mother, who had always been modest and cautious, seemed suddenly glowing. Dressed in expensive clothes, her mood lighter, her voice softer whenever Khalid was near. The pieces did not yet form a clear picture, but Aisha could sense a hidden current pulling beneath the surface. The long nights grew unbearable. She would wake to find Khalid's side of the bed cold, the silence of the villa broken only by the faint creak of doors in the distance. When she checked his office, it was often dark, papers neatly stacked as if untouched for hours. The gnawing suspicion in her chest refused to leave. Something was happening under her own roof, something she couldn't yet name, but feared would destroy her if she uncovered the truth. One night, unable to silence the storm in her mind, Aisha left her room and wandered the silent halls of the villa. The lights were dim, the air heavy, and each step she took echoed against the marble floor. She passed Khalid's office. It was locked and dark, just as it had been many nights before. A shiver ran through her. She knew he was somewhere inside the house, but not where he was supposed to be. Her feet carried her toward the guest suite where her mother stayed. The corridor felt colder there, the silence pressing harder against her ears. As she drew closer, she noticed the faintest sliver of light escaping from the barely opened door. She paused, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she told herself to turn back, to let go of the doubts that haunted her. But something deeper, something stronger, urged her forward. Through the small gap, Aisha's world collapsed in an instant. Inside, her husband lay beside her mother, their closeness undeniable. The sight pierced her like a blade, each second etching itself into her memory. She felt her legs weaken, her chest tighten, her heart break into 1,000 shards. The man she had trusted, the man she had built her new life with, was tangled in betrayal with the very woman who had raised her. Her first instinct was to scream, but no sound left her lips. Instead, she stood frozen, her body trembling as if it belonged to someone else. In that moment, every gift, every promise, every illusion of happiness shattered. She pulled away silently, retreating into the shadows of the villa, her mind spinning in disbelief. The fairy tale had not only ended, It had turned into a nightmare darker than she could ever have imagined. In the days that followed her discovery, Aisha moved like a ghost through the vast villa. She spoke little, ate less, and watched everything with silent eyes. Rage burned inside her, but she smothered it under a mask of calm. Instead of confronting them, she chose to uncover just how deep the betrayal ran. Quietly, she began searching. While Khalid was away and Mira distracted, Aisha slipped into her mother's room. Hidden among folded clothes, she found envelopes filled with cash and receipts from expensive boutiques, items Mira could never have afforded on her own. In Khalid's study, she discovered bank records showing transfers to accounts under Mira's name, dating back months before their marriage. Each paper she unfolded was another stab to her heart. The affair had not begun in Dubai. It had begun long before she had even walked down the aisle. The realization broke something within her. The mother she trusted most had been deceiving her for years, building a secret relationship with the very man who was supposed to be her future. What hurt even more was the thought that she had been nothing but a pawn, caught between their lies. At night, she would lie awake listening to the faint sounds of laughter or hushed voices drifting from the guest suite. Each whisper fueled her anger, each stolen moment carving deeper wounds. The villa that once symbolized her new life now felt like a gilded prison, its luxury mocking her misery. She began to see everything clearly: Khalid's distance, his false charm, her mother's sudden glow of wealth. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows. It was spread out before her in cold evidence. Aisha knew she could not remain silent much longer. The betrayal was too cruel, and it demanded a reckoning. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than Aisha expected. After weeks of silent torment, her strength finally broke. She confronted them both in the grand living room of the villa, where the chandeliers blazed above and the marble floor seemed to echo every trembling breath. Khalid sat in cold defiance, his jaw tight, while Mira shifted uneasily, her eyes avoiding her daughter's piercing stare. Aisha laid the evidence before them: bank statements, receipts, the jewels. Each item hit the table like a strike of thunder. The truth could no longer be denied. Khalid's face hardened, his voice sharp, but his excuses only deepened her fury. Mira, once the figure of comfort and love, begged for understanding, her voice cracking under the weight of shame. To Aisha, the pleas sounded hollow, like poison disguised as kindness. The tension spiraled into chaos. Khalid, terrified of scandal, threatened to silence Aisha if she dared expose them. His fear of losing power twisted into anger. The man who once promised her the world now stood before her as a stranger, dangerous and unrecognizable. Mira's betrayal cut even deeper. Her own blood had traded loyalty for desire and wealth. Neighbors later recalled hearing raised voices, the kind of shouting that cracked through the stillness of the night. Some swore they heard a scream, sharp and chilling, followed by a heavy silence. Behind the villa's locked gates, the confrontation raged like a storm no one could enter. Hours stretched, emotions spiraled, and the once glorious home descended into madness. No one outside knew what was happening within those walls, only that by dawn, everything would change forever. The betrayal that had festered in silence had now erupted into something far more dangerous, something that could no longer be undone. When the sun rose over Dubai the next morning, the villa was no longer a palace of wealth and beauty, but a scene of horror. Police arrived after a frightened staff member called in, reporting screams and violent noises from the night before. What they found inside shocked even the most seasoned officers. In the guest suite, Mira's lifeless body lay on the floor, her jewelry scattered like broken promises. Khalid was discovered nearby, barely conscious, his body marked with deep wounds. And in the center of the chaos sat Aisha, her hands trembling, her face pale, her clothes stained with blood. She did not cry or scream. She only stared blankly at the marble floor, as if her soul had already left her body. The investigation that followed unraveled the tangled web of lies and betrayal. Evidence confirmed the long-standing affair between Khalid and Mira, their secret meetings, and the money trails that had bound them together long before Aisha entered the picture. To the world, the story was unthinkable. A mother who betrayed her daughter, a husband who lived a double life, and a wife who finally reached her breaking point. News of the tragedy spread quickly, capturing headlines across continents. Some called Aisha a victim pushed too far. Others painted her as a woman consumed by vengeance. The courts would decide her fate, but in the eyes of the public, the fairy tale wedding had already transformed into one of the most chilling scandals of the decade. What began as a story of love and dreams had ended in blood and ruin. The villa that once stood as a symbol of power now carried only whispers of betrayal and death. Forever cursed by the night secrets were dragged into the open.